What is up, YouTube, and welcome back to another Fridge Financials video. In today's video, we talk about the difference between a recession and a depression. So if you're excited for today's video, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell notifications for all future uploads. As you might be able to tell with my voice, I think I'm battling a little bit of a cold right now, and we're on spring break. I love that so much for me here. So welcome to the channel, guys. If you're new here, again, my name is Fridge Financials. We are going to be breaking down some important financial information here. And today we're going to be looking at a couple different things here, looking at what happened with the stock market last week, the crazes that happened, and this article talking about President Donald Trump talking about he's okay with causing a recession, but he didn't want to cause a depression. So we'll talk about it. We'll break up in the news, and we'll look at some charts and look at some data, and we will kind of go from there. Now, again, full disclosure, I am sitting on a lot of cash right now in my portfolio. I made a video about that recently as well. Again, that's my take, my 2 cents. Not a financial advisor. None of this is financial advice, but that's just my opinion as to what I want to do right now until I figure the market has a better sense of direction. Okay, so President Donald Trump was aware the economy could enter a recession, but wanted to avoid a depression from his tariffs, according to the Wall Street Journal report. Just that alone is like, hey, I don't mind like putting the economy down into a recession, just not a depression. It's like, okay, sure. And I will say, honestly, if you look at the data and look at historical data, which we could take a look at, there is a lot of recessions that have happened over the last, 100 years or so in the economy here. So it's not like recessions are uncommon things here to keep in mind about here. So that's something to keep in mind about. Kevin Hassett, director of the U.S. National Economic Council, told CNBC on Thursday that the collapsing bond market contributed to Trump's decision to walk back on his trade policy. Now, if you want to watch a video, I made another video recently about the bond market, the basis of how it works and how it's going to be implemented and how it can be used to look at where the economy is going. We'll talk about the bonds a little bit here and look at the yield and talk about that a little bit later on. But so very interesting that he wants to do that. Thankfully, he wants to avoid a depression and not a recession. He's okay with going through a recession. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Trump told advisors he's willing to accept pain over the policy, which is great. He's just like, yeah, it's fine. We need it. I know that he was a cold. He's like, oh, like they need their medicine or whatever it was. I don't know, dude. This guy says some things to me that's just like, dude, I can't. I have no idea what this market's going to do. And again, it's not even just like, well, Fridge, look, when the market comes down 20%, that's the buy thing. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, potentially. But like we're in such an uncertainty in the market because one tweet, one post, one something is going to flip a switch in either direction, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't know if I want to be on that losing side of that switch, right? So he tweeted, or he did it on, I think it was like Truth Social or something like that last week on Wednesday morning. And he was like, something about like, it was like a hint of like buying the market and stuff like that. And it's going to pump and rally and stuff like that. And then 3 hours later, he announces the pause in tariffs. And the market just skyrockets 10%. And people look at this before we get anything more, and they're like, oh, well, Fridge, you missed 10% on the move. Well, it came down 5% the next day, which was like, whatever. It went up like 1.8% yesterday, which is, again, yeah, 10% on gains, 100%. But what would have happened if he came out and said something else, and the market went down another 10% instead of going up 10%, right? We just don't know. And again, even though I'm not saying like I'm not trying to time the market, I just am right now. I'm ready to sit back and just relax and just kind of hang out and just hope for the best. So that's kind of where I'm at. And again, these kind of things right here, these notes or these posts right here, these articles, is just things I'm just like, dude, I don't want to be a part of this right now. I just don't. I really can't. Can I trade options? Yeah. Did I make money this week? Yeah, I did. Did I make as much as what the S&P did? No, of course not. But, the market goes down next week. I don't lose as much money. So that's kind of where I'm at right now until the market makes a direction. I'm going to stockpile some cash a little bit, have my cash ready to go. Could I do a dollar cost average? Of course I can. But there's things to kind of keep in mind about as we keep going through. If we end up going into a recession, right, we'll look at some charts, look at some data and stuff like that as it goes. But anyways, so a depression is considered by economists to take place when a recession becomes more severe and entails higher unemployment and a more prolonged downturn. The U.S. has avoided them since the Great Depression in the 1930s, when unemployment hit 25%. Because of this program in monetary policy and fiscal policy, along with programs like deposit insurance from the FDICs, right? So the FDIC is what came in after the Great Depression happened, where everyone was pulling their money out and everyone was panicking and the money was getting taken out left, right, and center back in the Great Depression era. So they put in federal deposit insurance, so that way you're insured up to $250,000 or whatever the insurance is for it. Now, this article goes into more about talking about the bond market and why he flipped and why things happened and everything else. And we talk about, recession versus a depression here. And again, so this kind of talks about what a recession is, right? So let's talk about what a recession is a little bit. Let's cover that idea to make sure we know the difference between a recession and a depression. And those kind of things are important. So financial markets and the overall economy go through periods of ups and downs, but that doesn't mean a down week in the cycle in the stock market qualifies as a recession. It's not just because you have one bad week. Okay. It takes a lot more than a bad week to be a recession. Economic analysts focus on business cycles on the scales of months to years. Recessions are widespread and typically impact almost every sector in the economy. One common explanation of a recession is 2 or more negative quarters, consecutive quarters of negative GDP, though it is not an official definition, which I always love how it's like, there's no actual definition. Like, just give me the definition. Hey, this is a recession. But they don't go and give you a definition for whatever reason. The GDP, which measures the total value of finished goods and services during a particular time frame, is a leading indicator of the economy's health. Again, it focuses on things like imports, exports, those kind of things that we're looking at. And that's why when you think about imports, exports, these tariffs that are going to be implemented, that are being implemented here, could impact the GDP of the economy in a good way, or it can also impact it in a bad way. We don't know right now, obviously, because they just started getting implemented. Only time will tell. But people are starting to focus on the GDP to see what it comes in with, because a textbook definition, which is what I grew up learning, is that you have 2 negative quarters of GDP growth and you have a recession. The GDP, which okay, that's that. Still, other factors besides GDP come into play when it comes to determining when the U.S. has entered or emerged from a recession. The NBER is considered the quasi-official arbiter. So because they're the ones who make the end-all, be-all decision that we're looking at. So a lot of things that we do focus on for recessions is not just GDP. GDP is a huge factor because, again, that's talking about consumer demand, interest rates, slowing down the economy. If we're not buying as much, if we're not spending as much money into the economy to push it, to grow it, to, enhance it, to, expand our economy, we could contract the economy. It slows down. If we have a slowing down economy, that means slowing down GDP growth. That means there's other things that are happening underneath the surface, right? Unemployment rates, definitely. A high unemployment rate is not something that's good for us, okay? Because again, if people aren't working, people aren't spending, okay? There's not money being pumped into the economy from the consumer if people are not working. So what people are starting to watch, and myself included, what I'm watching the GDP number for Q1 coming in. I'm also watching how unemployment is reacting, because how unemployment reacts is a big problem. Jerome Powell has talked about this idea of a turnover of the labor market and what's going to happen. And it's the labor market that has the kind of the economy still somewhat pushed up, because again, since the labor market is doing okay, people are still buying, people are still spending, there's still money being pumped into the economy. The minute the labor market turns over and we see a huge unemployment come into play for whatever the reason is, that's when you're going to see a shock to the market. And you're going to see that happen because, again, high unemployment, people aren't working, people are stockpiling cash, people are freaking out, and that's where less spending happens and people start to just panic and hold all their cash. They might even start panic sell their investments and take that cash out, right? If I had $100,000 in the bank, but for example, I was getting laid off and I don't know when I'm going to work next, but I got bills to pay, they might start pulling from those assets, from those investments to pay their bills in the meantime. Who really knows, right? Obviously, it's not a good idea, but in times of uncertainty, you may have to do it. Lower personal income, so again, reduced hours and job losses. Again, these kind of go back into the unemployment as we look at here. A declining stock market, money being pulled out of the market, money being pulled out of the economy is definitely a bad thing to take a look at. Consumer confidence, which we talk about the Michigan reports all the time now on this channel, I feel like, and that could have the fear, the uncertainty, people pulling money out of the economy, so people pulling money out of the market, and that's a problem as well. And again, negative GDP growth also is there for you. They talk about what could it be, what caused recession. Oil prices is a big one. Inflation and monetary policy, which we're in right now that we're talking about, is inflation and monetary policy. Stock market crashes, which is those shocks that you get. Asset bubble collapses. The dot-com bubble, the most recent one that we had, where the market crashed. We had that recession back in 2000, 2001. People start to speculate that the AI bubble was a thing. It hasn't popped yet, but people are worried about it popping as a result of AI and everything else and how it's being bumped up and everything. There's a lot of things that happen there. And again, a depression is similar, but it's just more severe. It lasts longer, right? So the Great Depression took a lot longer of a time period. It lasted we could pull it up here. The Great Depression. It's not here actually. Oh, that's all right though. I believe the Great Depression was like 4 or 5 years long, whereas recessions usually have a little bit less of a time period for it. So is it over here? Oh, so this is a nice little breakdown here actually. So again, recession, GDP contraction less than 10%. Some analysts believe depressions are marked down by 10% or greater GDP. That would be insane. And again, people talk about what the GDP is right now. I like to use the Atlanta Fed Reserve. They do their estimate for the GDP, what they predict Q1 to come out as what it will be. Right now, as of April 9th, which is about 3 days ago, they're looking at a negative 0.3 adjusted for gold, because gold has imports and exports and everything else. Then it's just adjust for gold in that case. So looking at still a negative GDP, which is where people are starting to start to see a little bit of maybe possibly panicking. Okay, if Q1 comes in negative, all it takes is Q2 to come in negative, and then we have a recession, essentially, as the textbook definition, right? So people are trying to watch it very closely. Thankfully, it's recovered a little bit, which is good. But again, still having that small growing economy, maybe it comes in at like 0.4%, but then maybe next quarter is negative. Then the quarter after that is even more negative. You don't want that as much. So you don't want to have negative GDP because that's a very, very big indication that your economy is slowing down. So something to keep in mind about loss of income. You have the frequencies. So again, the recessions are the average time between recessions is about 5 years, almost 6 years. We've only had one depression, which was the Great Depression. That one lasted 10 years, roughly. So there you go. It's 10 years right there. And the length, since World War II, the average time between recessions is about 11 months. So if we are in a recession, we would be looking at an average time of about 11 months. And again, Investopedia breaks down each and every single one of them. We have all these different recessions. The V-Day recession, I don't even know a bunch about what these are. Honestly, I wasn't even thought of at the moment in time. Dot-com bubble was a huge one that I remember. Again, I was looking like 6 or 7, but I read a lot of things about it later on. Great Recession was another one where I was like, oh man, if only I wasn't in high school and I bought houses at this time period, that would have been great. But obviously I was in high school, right? And then the COVID recession, which was the shortest one of about 2 months. But again, huge unemployment rate. And that's because, again, things were shut down, economy was shut down, all that kind of stuff, which we talk about here. And the average length of recession, again, about 11 months or so, 10 months on average. All those kind of things are very, very important to consider. And a bear market is commonly defined as a substantial drop of 20% or more from peak market. Of the 25 bear markets since 1928, 14 have overlapped with recessions. So more than half of the recessions are leading to bear markets, right? So please keep in mind about, again, there's a lot of data we can go into. That's not the point of this video, talking about the difference between a recession and a depression here. But the one thing to keep in mind about is that we talk about the yields, right? So we talk about the yields here, and this right here is my focus behind the yields, right? So this is the 10-year versus the 2-year treasury. And again, in that article, Donald Trump talks about the bond market and what's going on with bonds and everything else and how it impacts things, right? So this is a chart here I pulled up in my bond market video from probably about 2 weeks ago. Same thing we're looking at here is the gray periods here are your recessions, and this is the 10-year versus the 2-year, okay? Now, the idea behind it, and I'll bring it up into here because this kind of breaks down very, very nicely, is looking at the 10-year versus the 2-year. When the market foresees stronger growth, higher inflation, or interest rate increase by the Fed, the shape of the curve steepens, meaning the 10-year is better than the 2-year. So higher inflation, interest rate increase by the Fed, the shape of the curve is going to steepen, meaning that you have the 10-year is better than the 2-year, right? So again, you have the steep curves here. And people say, oh, well, the 10-year versus the 2-year, it uninverted, so we're okay, right? No, not quite. On the other hand, when investors are expecting weaker growth, lower inflation, or an easier Fed policy, the spread narrows and the 2-year becomes the higher yield. If the curve goes below zero, becoming inverted, the 2-year having a higher yield than 10-year, the 10-year, the sickness is killing me, is a potentially recessionary signal. So people always say, well, Fridge, when it inverts, that's when the recession's happening. When it inverts, that's when the recession's happening. But if you take a look here, it inverted way down here, and there's been no recession. Where you see the recession come up is after it uninverts. Take a look. briefly basically was inverted, maybe hit just zero. I'm not really quite sure. Uninverted, and there's a recession. Here it is, inverted, uninverted. Big spike, big gap in the spread here. Recession happening here, happening here. Dot-com bubble, housing market recession, COVID-19. So it's not necessarily when it inverts that we get a recession right away. It's a recessionary signal. Okay. And again, what we look for and what I think about is that when it uninverts is the problem. And the inverted treasury yield curve has preceded the past 8 recessions while throwing out 2 false positives with an inversion in 1966 and a very flat one in 1998. When comparing lower term bonds to the 3 to 6 months yield of 10 years, the result follows a similar pattern. Many believe that comparing the 3 month and the 6 month to 10 years is a better indicator today of where we're headed than the 2 year versus 10 year. Okay. So the idea behind this, and again, this kind of just summarizes why Trump came out, was like, we're pausing rates, we're pausing the tariffs, we're pausing, that's not rates, we're pausing tariffs, we're done, we're pausing it for 90 days, we got to relax, everything is fine, we got to relax, okay? The reason why is because, again, you get this huge uptick in the 10-year versus the 2-year treasury bond, right? You get this huge uptick in this gap here. That means we're looking at higher inflation values, maybe higher interest rates. We're looking at, rates staying higher for longer. And if inflation is staying around and inflation is staying higher and interest rates stay higher as a result, we're not doing too well. And again, with the added impact of tariff implications potentially to inflation, that could just cause a disaster for the market, right? So with him pausing it, it caused this relief rally of 10%. It pumps up in the day, whatever, but it's not convincing to me. And as of right now, the difference into them is 0.52. For a lot of economists, they say about 0.5 is where you get this really start to big peak in fear and everything. I'm not really quite sure just yet about how true that is. A lot of people look at that data, but the thing to remember is that recessions usually follow an uninversion of the yield curve. So to me, personally speaking, as not a financial advisor, it's only a matter of time before we hit another recession. And then to keep about as well, they say about every 5 years or so, we have a recession. Well, when was the last one? 2020. Now we're in 2025. I don't know. This one was 2001, 2008, 2007, 2008-ish. So things to keep in mind about, again, recessions are relatively more common than people think. People hear the word recession, they freak out. Oh my God, it's over. No, you're thinking of depression. A Great Depression or a depression in the market is a bad one, right? So Trump wanted to come out and say, I don't want to cause a depression. I'm afraid of causing one with these tariffs here. I'm okay with a recession. Those are normal, but not depression. So at least I applaud him before he put us into a downward spiral of a depression for the next 10 years potentially, because the Great Depression was 5-10 years, however long it was. So thank you so much for watching today's video. Again, if you made this far in the video, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so, and turn on the bell notifications for all future uploads. I hope you guys learned the difference between a recession and a depression, and if not, it's basically a depression is a recession, more severe, higher unemployment, lower GDP growth, and it lasts for longer. I hope you guys are making money somewhere in the market, as per usual, and I will see you guys in the next video.